What if I told you that one man in history earned a title so extraordinary that it's been repeated across three major world religions for thousands of years? Not king, not prophet, not even saint, but friend. Friend of God. Think about that for a second. The creator of the universe, the infinite, the eternal, called someone his friend. How does that even happen? What does it take to become friends with God? And more importantly, what does this ancient story tell us about our own lives, our own relationships, and our own search for meaning? Abraham. You've probably heard the name. Maybe in Sunday school, maybe in a history class, maybe you've just seen it floating around in religious texts. But here's what most people don't realize. Abraham isn't just some dusty figure from ancient manuscripts. He's called the father of faith by billions of people. Jews trace their lineage through him. Christians see him as the model of belief. Muslims honor him as Ibrahim, a prophet of profound devotion. But there's this one title that stands out above all others. It appears in the Hebrew Bible, in the Christian scriptures, and in the Quran. Friend of God. Khalil Allah in Arabic. That's what they called him. That's what he became. So let's dig into this. Let's unpack what it really means and why it matters, not just for religious scholars or theologians, but for anyone who's ever wondered about faith, about trust, about what it means to have a relationship with something bigger than yourself. First, we need to go back. Way back. We're talking roughly 4,000 years ago, in ancient Mesopotamia. Abraham, originally called Abram, lived in a city called Ur. This wasn't some tiny village. Ur was sophisticated, bustling, and advanced for its time. They had art, architecture, astronomy, and yes, lots of gods. Statues everywhere. Temples to the moon god, to fertility goddesses, to deities of war and harvest. Everyone worshipped something they could see, something they could touch, something tangible. And then there's Abram. According to the stories, he hears something different. A voice, a call, not from a statue, not from a shrine, but from a God who had no form, no image, who was invisible and yet somehow more real than anything around him. And this God says something wild. Leave. Leave your country, leave your relatives, leave your father's house, and go to a land that I will show you. I'll make you into a great nation. I'll bless you. Your name will be great. You'll be a blessing to others. Now pause right there. Imagine you're Abram. You're probably 75 years old. You're settled. You have a life. And suddenly you're being asked to abandon everything familiar, everything secure, and walk into complete uncertainty. No GPS, no map, no guarantee, just a promise from a voice you can't see. Would you go? Would you trust that much? Abram did. And that's where it starts. That's the first step in understanding why he becomes known as God's friend. Friendship, real friendship, is built on trust. Not the shallow kind where you trust someone to show up on time or remember your birthday. The deep kind. The kind where you're willing to bet your life on someone's word. That's what Abram did. He trusted when it made no logical sense to trust. But here's the thing about trust. It's not a one-time event. It's tested. Again and again and again. And Abraham's story is full of tests. Some small, some absolutely crushing. Take the promise itself. God tells Abram he'll become a great nation. There's just one problem. Abram and his wife Sarai, they don't have kids. They're old, way past childbearing age. Years go by, decades go by. The promise seems impossible. Sarai even laughs when she overhears that she'll have a son. Not a joyful laugh, a bitter one. The kind that says, yeah, right, that'll never happen. But Abraham keeps believing. That's the original meaning of faith, by the way. Not blind acceptance, not refusing to think. It's trust in the face of impossibility. It's saying, I don't see how this works, but I'm holding on anyway. And eventually, miracle of miracles, they have a son. Isaac, the child of promise. The one everything hinges on. You'd think that's the happy ending, right? The old couple finally gets their kid, God keeps his word, and everyone lives happily ever after. But no, because shortly after comes the most famous, most disturbing, most debated test in Abraham's entire story. God tells Abraham to take Isaac, his only son, the son he loves, and offer him as a sacrifice on a mountain. Let that sink in. Sacrifice your son, the son you waited decades for, the son who represents every promise God ever made to you. Kill him with your own hands. This is where people stumble. This is where the story gets uncomfortable, even offensive to modern ears. And honestly, it should be uncomfortable. It's meant to be, because this isn't about God wanting child sacrifice. Ancient cultures did practice that, but the God of Abraham explicitly prohibited it later in the biblical law. So what's happening here? This is about the ultimate test of trust. It's about whether Abraham trusts God more than he trusts his own understanding, more than he trusts what makes sense, more than he even trusts his own love for his child. It's brutal. It's heavy. But Abraham goes. He takes Isaac up the mountain. He builds an altar. He binds his son. He raises the knife. And at the last second, God stops him. Don't hurt the boy. Now I know you fear God, because you haven't withheld your son from me. There's a ram caught in the bushes. Sacrifice that instead. Whether you read this as literal history or as a profound allegory, the message is clear. Abraham was willing to give up everything, even the thing he loved most, because he trusted God that much. And in that moment, something shifts. This isn't just a man following commands anymore. This is a relationship. This is intimacy. This is the kind of bond where you've been through the fire together and come out the other side. Friendship with God, as Abraham models it, isn't about perfection. Abraham messes up multiple times. He lies about his wife being his sister because he's scared for his own life. He tries to fulfill God's promise through his own schemes, which creates a whole mess with Hagar and Ishmael. He's human. He's flawed. But he keeps showing up. He keeps engaging. He keeps trusting. And that's what makes the friendship real. Real friends see your flaws and stick around anyway. Real friends call you out when you're wrong, but don't abandon you. Real friends are there in the waiting, in the silence, in the moments when nothing makes sense. There's this incredible scene in Genesis where God is about to destroy the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah because of their wickedness. And instead of just doing it, God says, "Should I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? He's going to become a great nation, and I've chosen him." So God tells Abraham the plan. And Abraham does something stunning. He argues. He negotiates. He says, "Wait, what if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Would you destroy the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 45? What about 40, 30, 20, 10? And God listens. God engages. God adjusts the terms. This isn't a servant cowering before a tyrant. This is a conversation between friends. There's respect, yes. There's reverence, absolutely. But there's also intimacy. There's the freedom to speak honestly, to question, to push back. That's what friendship looks like at its deepest level. It's not an agreement on everything. It's the safety to disagree. It's knowing the relationship is strong enough to handle honesty. Abraham understood that. He approached God with boldness, but also with humility. He knew when to speak and when to listen. He knew when to question and when to submit. Now let's zoom out for a second. Why does this matter? Why should anyone care about an ancient patriarch and his relationship with God? Because the themes here are universal. They transcend religion, culture, and time period. They speak to something fundamental about being human. We all long for connection. We all want to be known. We all crave relationships where we can be ourselves, flaws and all, and still be accepted. We all wrestle with trust, with doubt, with the gap between what we hope for and what we see. Abraham's story is about closing that gap, not through certainty, but through relationship. Think about your closest friendships. How did they form? They started with a choice to trust, right? Maybe a small one at first. You shared something, they responded well, and you shared more. Over time, through experiences together, through being there for each other, through weathering storms and celebrating victories, the bond deepened. That's exactly the pattern in Abraham's relationship with God. It starts with a call and a response. Then come the tests, the challenges, the moments where the friendship is proven. There's communication, back and forth. There's vulnerability. Abraham questions God. God reveals his plans to Abraham. They walk together, metaphorically and sometimes literally. The text says God appeared to Abraham, spoke with him, and visited him. This isn't distant deity stuff. This is personal. And here's what's revolutionary about this friendship model of relating to God. It changes everything. If God is the only master and we're only servants, the relationship is transactional. Do this, get that. Obey or be punished. But if God is a friend, if that's even possible, then the relationship becomes about love, not fear. It becomes about mutual commitment, not just a one-sided obligation. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard spent a lot of time thinking about Abraham. He wrote about what he called the teleological suspension of the ethical. Basically, he was trying to wrap his mind around how Abraham could be willing to sacrifice Isaac when that violates every ethical norm. He concluded that faith operates on a different level than ethics. It's not that ethics don't matter. They do. But there are moments when faith calls you beyond what makes sense morally, rationally, conventionally. Those moments reveal what you truly trust. Now, I'm not saying we should abandon reason or ethics. Not at all. But Kierkegaard's point is that real faith, the kind that transforms you, often requires you to step into territory where you can't lean on anything else. No logic to guide you. No social approval to validate you. Just you and God and the terrifying freedom of trust. That's what Abraham did over and over. And each time he chose trust, the friendship deepened. It's like those relationships where you go through something intense together, a crisis, a challenge, and afterwards you're closer than you ever were before. Shared experience creates intimacy. Abraham and God had a lot of shared experience. Let's talk about another dimension of this friendship. Generosity. In any real friendship, there's give and take. There's reciprocity. But between God and Abraham, the giving flows primarily in one direction. God gives promises, gives land, gives descendants, gives guidance, and gives protection. What does Abraham give back? His trust, his obedience, his willingness to be shaped and changed, his openness to God's purposes. But notice, God doesn't need Abraham. That's the wild part. God doesn't need anything. He's self-sufficient, complete, infinite. Yet he chooses to enter into this friendship. He chooses to make promises to Abraham that bind himself, that commit himself to acting in certain ways. Why? Because that's what love does. Love gives itself freely. Love makes itself vulnerable. Love creates space for a relationship even when it doesn't have to. And Abraham responds in kind. He gives himself. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but consistently. He keeps returning to trust even after he fails. He keeps seeking God even when God seems distant. He keeps moving forward even when the path is unclear. There's this concept in many spiritual traditions of the dark night of the soul. Times when you feel nothing, when God seems absent, when prayers feel like they hit the ceiling and bounce back. Abraham had those times. The years of waiting for Isaac. The horrifying walk up Mount Moriah. The silences between the dramatic moments. Friendship with God doesn't mean constant warm fuzzies and clear answers. It means staying in a relationship even through the darkness. Actually, that might be when friendship means the most. Anyone can believe when everything's going great. Anyone can trust when they can see the path. But to hold on when you can't see, when you don't understand, when it feels like maybe you made the whole thing up, that's when trust becomes real. That's when friendship is tested and proven. Let's think about what this means for faith today. We live in a world that's very different from Abraham's. We have science, technology, instant communication, and access to information that would have seemed like magic to ancient people. We have explanations for things that once seemed mysterious. We have control over aspects of life that once felt entirely up to fate or the gods. And yet, people still search for meaning, still ask the big questions, still long for a connection with something transcendent. The human heart hasn't changed that much. We still need to trust. We still need relationships. We still need to believe our lives matter, that we're part of something bigger than ourselves. Abraham's model of friendship with God offers something powerful here. It's not about checking boxes or following rules, though those might be part of it. It's about a relationship. It's about trust that grows over time. It's about showing up, being honest, wrestling with doubts, and choosing to stay engaged even when it's hard. This is so different from how a lot of people think about religion. They think it's about knowing the right doctrines, performing the right rituals, and being good enough to earn God's approval. But Abraham wasn't chosen because he was perfect. He wasn't selected because he had it all figured out. He was called while he was still in Ur, still surrounded by idols, still just a regular guy. God initiated the friendship. God made the first move. All Abraham did was respond. That's grace, by the way. That's the concept that God reaches toward us before we reach toward him. That relationship with God isn't something we achieve, but something we receive. Abraham understood this. He didn't earn God's friendship through his worthiness. He received it through his willingness to trust. And that trust, that friendship, changed him. He went from Abram to Abraham. The name change signified a new identity. He wasn't who he was before. The relationship transformed him. That's what real friendship does, isn't it? Your closest friends shape you. They influence how you think, how you see the world, and what you value. You become, in some sense, a reflection of the company you keep. Abraham became a reflection of the God he befriended. More generous, more trusting, more willing to take risks for what he believed in, more concerned with justice, as we see in his plea for Sodom, more aware of his own limitations, but also more confident in God's faithfulness. The friendship made him more himself, more fully human, more aligned with his purpose. There's a Jewish teaching that says Abraham had 10 tests throughout his life, and he passed them all. Different rabbis count them differently, but the idea is that each test refined him, prepared him, deepened his faith. The tests weren't punishments. They were opportunities, chances to choose trust again, chances to let the friendship grow stronger. We face tests too. Not the same ones, obviously. Most of us won't be asked to sacrifice a child or leave everything familiar behind. But we face our own moments of decision, times when we have to choose between fear and trust, between control and surrender, between our way and something bigger. Those are our tests. Those are our opportunities to deepen whatever faith we have, whether it's faith in God, faith in people, faith in life itself. Abraham also teaches us about patience. Man, does he teach us about patience. 25 years between the promise of a son and the birth of Isaac. 25 years. That's a quarter century of waiting, of wondering, of hoping against hope. We live in an instant gratification culture. We want results now, answers now, success now. But some things can't be rushed. Some relationships take time to develop. Some promises take decades to fulfill. The friendship between God and Abraham unfolded over Abraham's entire adult life. It wasn't a quick transaction. It was a long, slow, sometimes painful journey. But that's what made it deep. That's what made it real. Quick and easy rarely leads to profound and lasting. If we want relationships that matter, if we want faith that sustains us, we have to be willing to stay in it for the long haul. Here's another thing about Abraham that's easy to miss. He built altars. Everywhere God appeared to him or spoke to him, Abraham built an altar. These weren't fancy structures, just piles of stones, really. But they were markers, reminders. They said something happened here. God was present here. I encountered the divine here. I committed here. We need markers too. Ways to remember the moments when we experienced something beyond ourselves. When we felt connected to something greater. When we made a choice that mattered. Maybe it's not literal altars for most of us. Maybe it's journals or photos or traditions or stories we tell. But we need ways to remember because memory sustains faith. When the present is difficult, we can look back at what God has done, at how we've been carried before, at the promises that have been kept. Abraham did that. When he faced new challenges, he could remember remember the promise, Remember Isaac's birth. Remember God's faithfulness. Each past encounter strengthened his trust for the next test. Let's address something that might be on your mind. Is this friendship model of relating to God even possible for regular people? Abraham seems so extraordinary. He's the father of faith, after all. Can ordinary people really be friends with God? Here's what I think. Abraham was ordinary until he chose to trust. He became extraordinary through the relationship, not before it. The friendship with God made him who he was. And that same offer, that same possibility, extends to everyone. Maybe not everyone accepts it. Maybe not everyone even hears it. But it's there. The New Testament picks up this theme. Jesus tells his disciples, "I no longer call you servants, because a servant doesn't know his master's business. Instead, I've called you friends, for everything I learned from my Father I've made known to you." That's Abraham's legacy continuing. That's the friendship model expanding. God wants friends, not just followers. Partners, not just servants. People who engage, question, trust, and grow. And that friendship changes everything about how we live. If we're just trying to earn God's approval, life becomes exhausting. It's a constant performance, never knowing if we're good enough. But if we're friends with God, if we're in a relationship, then it's about trust and love, not achievement and fear. We're free to be honest about our struggles, free to admit our doubts, free to ask for help, free to celebrate, free to rest. Abraham wasn't perfect, but he was faithful. He wasn't sinless, but he was committed. He didn't have all the answers, but he had a relationship, and that made all the difference. So what does this mean practically? How do we cultivate this kind of friendship with God? I think Abraham shows us several things. First, we have to be willing to take the first step, to respond when we sense a call, to trust even when we don't have the full picture. Second, we have to stay engaged over time. One experience isn't enough. Friendship requires ongoing presence, ongoing choice. Third, we have to be honest. Abraham questioned God. He expressed his fears. He didn't pretend to have it all together. Real friendship requires vulnerability. Fourth, we have to let the relationship change us. Abraham's identity shifted. His priorities changed. His courage grew. If our faith leaves us exactly as we were, it's probably not very deep. Fifth, we have to remember. We build our altars, whatever form they take. We look back at God's faithfulness as a foundation for present trust. Abraham's friendship with God wasn't easy. It cost him. It challenged him. It required everything he had. But it also gave him everything that mattered. Purpose, meaning, legacy, a sense of being part of something eternal, the confidence that his life counted, the joy of being known by the one who knows everything. That's available, not just to ancient patriarchs or religious superstars, to anyone willing to trust, to anyone willing to take the journey, to anyone willing to let go of control and step into a relationship with the God who calls us friends.